Ladies and gentlemen, Mollusk here, and I haven't done a channel update in a while, and I fancied doing one. I'll talk a little bit about my 2023, there isn't really much to cover, and outline some of my hopes and aspirations for 2024. So in the last few years my channel has mostly been about documenting my hobby playing League of Legends, but the channel had its roots in tabletop wargaming, and honestly I'm increasingly missing it and getting the itch to play again. So if all goes well, I might start adding some more of that content back again. But a few years ago I moved cities, started a relatively demanding job, started a family, and basically couldn't commit the time and energy to integrate into a new gaming scene and commit the time that the hobby and the documenting of the hobby really needed from me. But honestly, I really do miss it, and I'd like to try to find a way to have it back in my life. So what I think I'm mostly going to talk about here are my hopes for 2024 and some of the game systems I'm looking at. In all probability, I'm only going to have enough time and bandwidth for one of them, and I felt like talking to myself about them. So, first up, League of Legends, the only game I've been playing for the last few years. My goal in Season 13 was to hit gold. I did not achieve that. Instead of focusing on playing lots of games on one account, as I told myself I would, I instead played 20 or 30 games experimenting with adding Hecarim to my pool, getting to silver, feeling satisfied, and then wondering, well, could I get to silver in the support role playing my Swain, who I play quite a lot with my friends when we play normals, and I probably consider my strongest support champ. And we tend to play with a range of gold to platinum and a few diamonds in our normal games, and I just wondered how Swain would stack up in ranked. So I started on a fresh account and played Swain from, I think, like the very, very deepest depths of bronze into silver. It took more games than I thought. I think it was about 50 something. But once I'd got to silver with him, I felt satisfied, and then switched back to playing on a third account, Kindred only, and got to silver 3 in, I don't know, about 12 or 15 games, something like that, before the season ended. So I completely dodged my objective for the year, and whilst it was fun, it was a bit silly. So this year, 2024, the goal is just to play on one account, just play Kindred, and just play as many games as possible. And by that I mean aim at one game a day. That's probably a bit much. 1 or 2 games every few days is probably more realistic, but you know, it's a good thing to sort of aim for. And just enjoy playing Kindred and not think too much about it. So why have I got these other characters in the picture then, if I'm just going to focus on Kindred? Well, when I play with my friends, I tend to play the support role, and I enjoy playing mages in support. So when I do that, I'll be playing Swain and Talia. I'd really like to make Talia work, because she's obviously primarily a jungler. I really enjoy her style and her role in the team. And she brings AP and crowd control that helps cover some of Kindred's blind spots as a pick, because sometimes Kindred gets banned and sometimes they just don't fit the team comp. And I've got Diana lurking there in the background, because up till now she's been my second because she's easier to execute than Talia. And I guess until I get better at Talia, I'm not going to fully phase her out. So yeah, so that's my plan for League. And I've got to say, 2024 has got off to a banging start with an amazing cinematic heavily featuring Kindred, which got me sufficiently hyped, and a lot of the changes I've made, removing the mythics, actually starting me in silver this time, and putting out a lot of fun new map changes to explore, have got me pretty optimistic for the season ahead. So, moving on. Oh, I forgot I put this slide in. Right, I was going to talk about, so I didn't record any of my stats during 2023 as I had done previously. But these are some screenshots from my op.gg history for the Kindred account, just as sort of evidence for the experience I had with all 3 accounts I played on. In order to get out of bronze into silver, I was playing in high silver, low gold lobbies. And once I got into low silver, that started to shift to higher gold, starting to get into platinum. And this is basically why I'm not really bothered about hitting gold as a target this year, because as far as I can see, I basically already play in gold, and regardless of whether that's true or not, I find these games fun and an appropriate challenge level, and that really is the fundamental point of playing the game in the first place. So yeah, that's League covered. Let's talk about Malifaux. So Malifaux was was my game. When Games Workshop killed Warhammer Fantasy Battles and replaced it with their Age of Sigmar, it forced me to find a new gaming system, it forced me to get out there and find other people to play against, and join the wonderful London Darksphere community, and it was great. I got to play Malifaux, have it like this perpetual morsel that my mind was like constantly chewing on. Oh, it was delicious. And even started to get to play some tournaments, and honestly, I want that again. So if I get the opportunity to go back to Malifaux, what would I do? Well, I've got a decent chunk of the Neverborn and Resurrectionist factions. I started out with Lilith and Kalodi, who are both, unfortunately, in the Dead Man's Hand for Malifaux 3rd edition. But as Neverborn are quite a tricky faction to play comparatively, I found more success with the Resurrectionists, and that's probably where I mainly came into my own, with McMorning and then towards the end, sort of starting to dabble in Molly. So I probably should get back into playing Rezzers, but deep down I want to give Neverborn another try. And as I've got both pretty much the full Nephilim and Swamp themed keywords, as well as most of the versatile models, or at least the ones that were available in M2E, I could definitely do that. And Nekima and Zoraida cover both the killy and the kind of more schemy playstyles. But we have this rather intriguing new guy on the block. Castor. Not only is he rocking that Nephilim aesthetic that ultimately pulled me from my Beastmen in Warhammer to my very first crew in Malifaux, but he straddles both my factions, and he has both a kind of more schemy and more killy version of himself. And if I buy him, I get some more stuff to paint to really get me hyped for the hobby again. And I think by focusing on just one master, that's likely to catch me up on the edition changes most quickly, and get me into the position where I can start to play competitively and at least make games somewhat competitive. So yeah, if it's going to be Malifaux, I think we're all in on Castor. So what are the issues? Why am I not just going to dive headlong back through the breach and do this thing that I clearly want to do? Well, the main reason is, on top of the fact that my job hasn't really got that much less demanding, I've still got a wife and kids. I'm not really intending to play less League, I'm just intending to make it sort of less of my mind pie slice. I'm also going to have to basically get back into driving again, which I haven't had to do for more than a decade at this point, in order to actually get to the game club in order to play the games. And yes, I know I could play on Vassal, but honestly, that's just not the way I want to enjoy the hobby. The other, potentially lesser reason, but still not insignificant, is the potential resurgence of this game, Guild Ball, which in the last year or so I was in London was the game most of my community switched to playing, and so it was basically what I switched to playing too. And I have to say, Guild Ball never really clicked with me. I don't know what it was, but I was never able to read the game in the same way as I could with Malifaux. But there is a reason why, despite how much I loved the card mechanics in Malifaux, I can never really go back to dice after that. The models were great, the factions were great, the lore was great. I loved Malifaux, if you couldn't tell. Despite all that, Guild Ball sucked me in, and I went willingly, and that is because Guild Ball is a phenomenal game. Many people like the lore, it never resonated with me, but Scatha and the Winter's Moon Hunters absolutely ensnared me. There was just something about the theme and the way, particularly Scatha played, that really drew me. And if you played Guild Ball or you're familiar at all with the scene, then you probably would have heard people saying, oh, it's the cleanest game. And I absolutely agree. You had that tiny squad of miniatures you could fit in an easy, really, really portable case, and then you had the strategic fun of which models you'd flex in or out. But because there are so few of them, and because the win condition was the same in every game, it didn't quite take over my mind in the same way that Malifaux does. And that bit of mental free space before going into a game was really refreshing. And sort of on that note, just the simplicity of the map and the few scattered bits of terrain, the game was so easy to set up and play. The aesthetic was great because you could just see all the models without bits of intervening terrain and stuff like that. It made the aesthetic clean. And then the way the playbooks were done and the dice math was on point, just brought it all together to make it the perfect competitive skirmish game, because it really favours the better player. in a way that any game I've played or even heard of has done before or since. Oh, and did I mention the chess clock? The chess clock! Guaranteeing games of an acceptable length, encouraging activations to be snappy, making it possible to get multiple games in an evening. I just don't know how you go back. I don't know how you go back. If I play Malifaux again, if Malifaux is what I end up going with, I'm playing Malifaux on a chess clock. And just concede to my opponent when my time's up. So that's why, even when I love Malifaux so much, the competitive qualities and the just real-life logistics compatibilities of Guildmore mean that you can never take it off the table. Except for the fact it's a dead game, right? Like the company, Steamforged, made the deliberate decision to stop supporting it, basically just after I stopped playing it for my own reasons. So without official support and legitimacy, a game sort of just loses its soul, right? But the big recent news is that Guild Ball might be coming back. Steamforged might be looking to support it once more. And regardless of anything else, and there's a lot of everything else that I'll touch on in a second, regardless of anything else, a really quite sizable chunk of the UK competitive tabletop wargaming scene are ex-Guild Ball players. And regardless of whatever feelings are flying around, I'm pretty sure that if it were to be supported again, a lot of people wouldn't be able to help themselves, and it would take over the gaming space again. It was that good a game. Now obviously there's quite a bit of recent history surrounding the death, preservation, and now potential rebirth of Guild Ball. Because if you're a wargamer watching this, and goodness knows why you are after all this time, but yeah, if you are, then you probably know this already. And if you're not, and you're, I don't know, one of the 12 people who for some reason watches my League content, and you've stuck around to listen to me nerd out about toy soldiers, then it's a pretty singular story that I think anyone with an interest in gaming would do well to heed. If you want to find out what happened, I'm not the best source, but I can point you in the right direction and offer some maybe relatively impartial observations, as Guild Ball was never the game of my heart, and I stopped playing just before the fateful events that led to its end. And I followed some of the recent developments with a bit of interest as it's coincided with my passion for wargaming being rekindled. So first off, I direct you to a video released by Steamforged on their YouTube channel called An Address to the Community, or something like that. I'll have the links to all the sources I'm going to mention down in the video description below, where the founders of Steamforged Games and the people who ultimately made the decision to kill off their flagship baby that put them on the map discuss their side of events in what really is quite a cringy waffle of a video, but which I think captures Steamforged's communication style quite faithfully. And essentially they paint a picture of their decision being based around the fact that Guild Ball wasn't making the money, which I see no reason to disbelieve, and that they wanted to pivot their company's focus to the more lucrative board game IP that has really defined the company over the last few years, and acknowledge the supply chain issues they were having with Guild Ball at the time, and tried to express regret and apologise for the way they communicated the end of Guild Ball to the community, and acknowledge their failure to communicate the message they intended or would have wanted to send out. And I think by any standards, it wasn't a great apology. And whilst I do think they honestly regret the way they handled events, I can absolutely forgive someone coming away with a more cynical impression. Especially as, to my knowledge, certain things they said don't line up or just aren't true. The line about COVID being an important factor, for instance, which no doubt was rough on the company, but occurred after all the important decisions had been made. And certain things like the explosive comment they made in their letter, blaming the way the community was playing the game for one of the reasons it was failing, alongside the fact they closed their website's discussion forum a decent while before actually killing off the game, just gives me the impression that the game wasn't doing particularly well financially, because lots of the player base had already bought in pretty much as much as they were going to. Or maybe not, but at least in a context where, from my memory, a good year, maybe a year and a half had gone by, where every single release had been delayed, and it was really hard to get hold of models, or else wasn't that enticing to buy or pre-order them anymore, because you knew it'd be months before you saw them. And I just get the sense that some people at Steamforged were getting tired of the community's constant bitching about this rule needs to be changed, that thing needs to be changed, which I suspect led to the forum getting shut down. I know they said at the time that they felt the Discord and Facebook groups were providing that service better than they were, and so they didn't feel it was worth their time to keep moderating the forums, but I just don't believe that. And I can't help but feel that maybe some people at Steamforged started to feel that the reason for slowing profits was due to, I don't know, gatekeeping of new blood getting into the game from a toxic, overly competitive player base, rather than, say, limitations of the customer base being reached, or supply chain issues. And I think if you were inclined, you could read some of that sentiment in the infamous letter they sent to the community. So, just as when Warhammer Fantasy died and the Ninth Age stepped in to keep the game system going, a community project was founded to keep Guild Ball going, helmed by some very passionate and dedicated players, to whom there is not a shadow of a doubt the potential for the revival of this game would not be happening without. And you can listen to the response to Steamforged's recent announcement from people with insight into the thoughts and workings of the community project on the Singled Out podcast, which I'll put a link to in the video description. Following up on the 10th anniversary address to the community, to their credit, and I would say quite bravely, the founders of Steamforged hosted a live Q&A on their YouTube channel, which I attended the first hour or so of, and should now be up on their YouTube channel for others to watch. And I have to say they came across a lot better, and the general feeling I got was really quite positive. I know not a few people see this as a cynical money grab, driven by the company Steamforged being in a lot of debt, and maybe their board game products aren't selling so well anymore. I can't attest to the veracity of those claims, but I did get the impression that whatever feelings might have been felt around the time they killed Guild Ball off had softened with time, and they do genuinely want to do right by the game they created. And I absolutely don't think those two interpretations are mutually exclusive. The synopsis I got from the Q&A was that Steamforged would like to support Guild Ball again. They respect the efforts of the community project over the interim, and are prepared to work with, and importantly I think, be guided by the community project to a considerable extent. Things are very tentative currently, and nothing is set in stone, and it seems like direction is likely to be hashed out in the next couple of months. But for now, Steamforged appear to be committed to providing data files to allow a certain portion of the Guild Ball range to be printed on demand, i.e. by 3D printers at home, for free. And I don't know if I wasn't clear on exactly how much the range would be available and how much of it would be free and how much of it would have a cost implication. They probably mentioned it and I missed it. It wasn't really my area of focus, as I'm not going to be buying any more Guild Ball for sure. I'm happy with what I've got. But I think it's worth noting that regardless of the apparent generosity and tact that Guild Ball, that Steamforged or seem to be prepared to approach bringing Guild Ball back with, their long-term support is going to be predicated on its potential to help them do business with friendly local game stores or other potential business partners, on the back of people visibly playing the game and having that in some way impact positively on sales in the game stores. I'm a bit concerned that incentives don't really align in that regard if they're giving out their products basically for free to be printed at home. I'm not sure how that's going to incentivize game stores to want to support Guild Ball and work with Steamforged. I don't know if game stores with 3D printers could print models on demand for their customers as sort of a paid service. I don't know what the legalities of resale and secondary market are there. Could be potentially a pretty big deal for the whole miniature wargaming industry, but then could lead to some very strange places where miniature companies don't actually produce miniatures and are basically concept design and rules companies. Anyway, it's certainly quite an interesting and fragile space at the moment in any case. But things do seem to be looking up for Guild Ball. These do seem like quite positive developments, and really the only thing that would stop its comeback would be that the wounds in the community have just gone too deep, or if enough people have moved on to other systems and are satisfied. But I do think that there will be an appetite for the game if handled properly. But in order to understand the wounds left by this event on the people who, unlike myself, were really committed to the game and went through its murder and the long intervening period with very little closure, I think it is very much worth listening to the words of Rich Keeling on his Beardpod podcast episode with his response to the Guild Ball announcements, which I will also put in the description below. Now, I didn't know Rich well, and honestly I didn't really follow his work very closely. Certain aspects of the style just weren't really my cup of tea, but I had enormous respect for the work he did. His content was, without a shadow of a doubt, the best Guild Ball match reports and lore coverage. Just period. The hours he must have spent making that stuff, I just can't imagine. And I think if there's ever a testament to what games can mean to someone, I think this Beardpod response is probably it. So, all that to say, I'd really like to play Malifaux again, but if Guild Ball takes off again, and that is quite a big if, it's got a serious hill to climb, then it might just be unavoidable. So with everything I've said about Malifaux and Guild Ball, how could there possibly be space for another contender? And I can't really answer that, but there is a wild card, a dark horse in the race for my attention, and that is Kill Team. So like probably 99% of the miniature wargame player base, I got into the hobby through Warhammer and Warhammer 40k. My very first YouTube videos, the whole reason I started my YouTube channel was to document my games. And despite how bad the writing seems to have gotten nowadays, like, oh my goodness, I'm still a sucker for 40k lore. And I just so happen to have been gifted a Kill Team, the Kroot, what they called, Farstalker Kinband, for Christmas this year, on the back of me looking through my old Warhammer collection to see which things I might sell, and then falling in and painting some of my old unpainted Harlequins, and looking into Kill Team, like finding kind of this relatively more recent and revised version of Kill Team, and then got the Kroot for Christmas, and so I technically got 2 Kill Teams. And the idea of being able to play a skirmish game in the 40k setting, I mean, it does appeal. I'm going to say I don't have much hope for it. I just don't think Games Workshop produce very interesting rule sets, or I should say rule sets that appeal or interest me. And Kill Team does look quite simplistic, but it also seems like it's got some potential. And simplistic's not necessarily a bad thing if it's also solid and clean in inverted commas. So basically, I'm down to give it a try if the opportunity presents itself, and we'll take it from there. Finally, Guild Ball isn't the only game that's been pulled out of the morgue and is on the table for resurrection. It seems Warhammer Fantasy Battles is being reborn as Warhammer The Old World. And I even had a comment asking me if this is something I might dust off the goats and get back into. Sadly, the answer is no. I loved my goatees. They'll always have a place in my heart, and to be honest, if Games Workshop hadn't brought the end times, I would probably still be playing them, but would never have known the joys of Malifaux and Guild Ball. But no, I'm not going back. And that isn't actually even because of my dislike for Games Workshop, because even though every time I revisit, sneak a glance back and see what's going on, I'm just turned off even more. It isn't a big deal to me, I'm happy to play Kill Team if it's a good game. But ultimately, I just can't go back to the pitched Battlefield style game after discovering how much I love the skirmish style. So I wish the old world all the best. I think it's a great thing to bring that setting back. I really hope people enjoy it. It's just not for me. So on that note, guys, exciting times ahead. I really hope I can get back on the tabletop in 2024. And all the best to you in your endeavours. Take care.